Penalties in the Latter-day Saint Temple Endowment. Let's talk about it. Latter-day Saints make sacred covenants with God in the Temple Endowment ceremony, and anciently, covenants followed a pretty predictable formulaic pattern. Among other things, there was usually an introduction. They listed the terms of the covenant, there was a formal oath-taking part of the ceremony, and they were accompanied by blessings and cursings. These blessings and cursings outlined the good and bad consequences for obeying and disobeying the covenant, respectively. It was basically a cross my heart, hope to unalive, stick a needle in my eye sort of thing. They were to impress the seriousness of the covenant, not necessarily to be taken literally, and this shows up all over the Bible. First, in Genesis 15, God made a covenant with Abraham, and God witnessed to that covenant by having Abraham sacrifice animals, divide them, and line them up in two lines with an aisle in between. The presence of God shows up and passes through the sacrifice divided animals as kind of a way to say, may I be as these severed animals if I do not fulfill my end of the bargain. At the end of the book of Deuteronomy, the Israelites renewed their covenant with God by building an altar on Mount Ebal and Gerizim and reciting blessings and cursings back and forth to each other as a way to symbolically witness to these theoretical consequences. In the book of Ruth, Ruth and Naomi have this really tender moment where Ruth promises to stay with Naomi forever no matter what. But what's really going on here is a sort of oath or covenant. She says, where thou unalivest will I unalive, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but unaliving part me and thee. Euphemisms aside, when Ruth says, the Lord do so to me, she's likely referring to how she would rather unalive than break her oath to Naomi. Several commentators have noted how there may have even been a physical gesture associated with this statement to highlight the seriousness of Ruth's oath. Starting in the Renaissance and Enlightenment eras, Freemasons used symbolic gestures of penalty in association with the promises they made to live good moral lives, drawing on this biblical tradition of oath-making. Some branches of Christianity today use the sign of the cross in their rituals and devotion. The hand gesture itself symbolizes the unaliving of Jesus Christ, which is kind of a gruesome symbol when you think about it, but it's also a multifaceted and beautiful expression of faith. It can be a way for adherents to connect to the sacrifice of Christ and remind them of the price of salvation. It's used as a gesture of blessing in sacraments or ordinances such as baptism and the Eucharist. In the Latter-day Saint Temple, members make solemn promises with God, and with that comes the exhortation that these covenants are to be taken seriously. Before 1990, the Temple Endowment ceremony included strong admonitions about the symbolic consequences for breaking covenants that reflected these ancient biblical notions of covenant making. Penalties were not about literally inflicting injuries on yourself or others, but like biblical covenants, they were about impressing how seriously we should be taking these commitments. The demonstration of these penalties has since been removed from the ceremony, and keeping these covenants sacred is still strongly emphasized. There are parts of the Temple Endowment ceremony that we promise not to disclose because of their sacredness, but if you'd like to learn more about these ancient biblical covenant patterns, you can find a video in the Scripture Plus app in Deuteronomy chapter 1 and follow for more Latter-day Saint content.